Hey there everybody, it's Mark Crowley. I'm back with another how to draw video. You know, a couple of months back I did a video on how to illustrate wooden surfaces, and this time I want to do a video about drawing lizard-like skin, sort of reptilian skin. Now, rather than just doing a random patch of lizard skin pattern, I thought I would apply it to this illustration of the human eye, just to show how an illustrator might take this technique of, making something that looks like reptilian skin and applying it to some other illustration. You know, I've chosen the human eye. You could be applying this to a drawing of some kind of creature, like a dragon or a dinosaur or something like that. But anyway, that's and the other benefit of using the human eyes, I have these other videos that sort of show you in a step-by-step way how to draw an eye much like this one. And so I'm going to link to one of those videos in the info box, and maybe also right now in a annotation link, if you want to try to follow along with this video in a line-by-line way. Well, the first thing that I want to do in order to create this lizard-like skin is to apply watercolor around the whole area of the eye here. I'm going to use a pale green, and let's just go ahead and do that in time-lapse. Alright, well this is just sort of a base layer of green, but I'm going to do just a little real time here, applying a slightly darker shade to this area as I sort of begin to explain what my technique is going to be. What I want to do is begin by getting this solid base layer down here. It doesn't need to be real beautiful, I just want to get some basic color on the page. And then my next step is going to be to use colored pencil to begin indicating the sort of individual scales of the of this lizard skin surface. Now I could have done that first, but I felt like if I spent a lot of time on the pencil drawing at the beginning, and then I go on top of it with this watercolor, I would probably obliterate a lot of that painstaking work that I did of drawing these individual scales. So my thinking, a lot of illustration comes down to planning out the order in which you're going to do stuff. And so I sort of strategized a little and thought, well, let's get this green tone down first, then we can do the scales later on. Now I am considering a little bit light source here. This is a white highlight. The light is kind of coming from the right, and so it's casting a little bit of a shadow on the left side of this eye. It's funny, as I talked about obliterating, you can sort of see here these eyelashes that I spent a fair amount of time drawing are in fact getting a little bit obliterated by the watercolor. So unfortunately that's I'll have to go back in and redraw those eyelashes. Well, I'm going to let this dry a little bit, and then I'm going to come back in and start doing some of this work on the scales. Alright, well I'm going to do some of this real time, but there's just going to be a lot of time lapse throughout this entire video. Unfortunately, it's I can predict that this video will take at least 3 or 4 hours to complete. So to do it all real time is just, it ain't gonna happen, folks. So what I'm doing, I'm beginning now, and I looked at photos of like lizards' eyes, like a close-up photo of lizards' eyes. And I noticed that there did seem to be sort of squarish scales right near the eye, sort of holding it in place. And then after that, outside of that little rim around the eye, that things began to get a little more random looking, not quite so regular of a pattern. So I'm beginning by dividing this up into squares, and just assume that will continue as I go along. But I wanted to do maybe just a little sampling here. Let me try zooming in a bit. Hang on. Well, actually, this is about as zoomed in as it can get right now, sadly. So, but anyway, I'm going to go ahead and start putting in some of these slightly more circular scales down here. And I suppose one thing that I would point out, if you want this to look, three-dimensional, have a sort of solid surface to it, you got to start thinking about the shape of the surface that you're applying these scales to. So, I sort of see this as rounded a little bit beneath the eye socket, and so I'm trying to imagine, the direction of these scales. Maybe they become a little oval in spots, sort of stretching across this area, that's holding the eye in place. So, they would be more oval in this area. Maybe up here, I would imagine them stretching in a slightly different direction. See how I'm doing this? It's just trying to take into account the direction of the skin, the sort of surface, and not be fighting against that, but rather be, working with that to reveal it by way of the scales. And you can see me sort of fitting them together. It's almost like a stone wall or something. You're, sort of, except you're able to create the stones as you go, making them fit up against each other. Yeah, maybe that shows you some idea how that's going to go. Let me go ahead and do more of this in time-lapse, and then I'll come back as we draw some larger scales that are a little further away from the eye. Alright, so one thing that I noticed, again, as I was studying photos of lizards' eyes, that as you got further away from the actual eye socket, that the scales would get larger. Now, my thinking, and not that I'm an expert on this stuff, but it seems to me that the skin needs to be more flexible as it's closer to the eye, because the eye is sort of darting around and so forth. And then as you get further away, there's no need for that flexibility, so the scales can become sort of larger and maybe take on more of just a simple, protective aspect to them. And, I think what's nice about that is not only is it accurate to nature, but it makes your drawing more interesting. If we just fill in this whole space with scales of exactly the same size, it gets a little repetitive visually. And so, just maybe a happy coincidence that nature provides us with an excuse to add some variety here. Now, one thing that's going to become a little tricky is I want to add two different colors. I want there to be not just green, but another color, probably blue, I think is what I'm going to go for. Again, just to make it a little more interesting. And unfortunately, what that means is going back in with watercolor, and that probably will again start to obliterate things. That's the word of the day today, obliterate. I'm obliterating my own drawing, man. And so what I think I probably need to do is maybe go in with some of that blue coloring right now in a somewhat random way, and then start putting in the scales on top of that blue color that I add. So hang on a second. I'm going to pull out the old watercolor brush again and start adding a bit of blue just around the edges of the illustration. Alright, so having gone in with a little bit of blue watercolor, I can continue with adding these scales. Now, my idea was that, that you wouldn't have one scale that was half blue and half green, that the dividing line of the color would be the dividing line of the scales. Not sure if that's necessarily the case in real reptiles or all different types of animals, but that's the way I'm going to do it. I've just decided wherever the color breaks, that's where a new scale begins. And as I said, I'm trying to make the scales a little larger as we get farther away from the eye. And I got to watch myself as I begin to draw outside of the video frame. But you know what? This is starting to remind me a little of the female character from the movie Avatar. What was her name? Neytiri or something like that. Don't know how much it actually looks like that, but for some reason it's starting to, maybe just because of the blue. When you add blue to a feminine looking eye, it starts to look like Avatar by James Cameron. Anyway, so I think I've maybe said enough about my technique here for adding the basic line to the scales. I think the next thing to do is to start coming in here with a little bit of colored pencil. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over to that and maybe start to refine the shapes of these scales just a little bit. Okay, so I've grabbed a green, sort of an olive green colored pencil here, and I'm going in and I'm going to begin adding a little bit of shading to each individual scale. So you can imagine this is, it becomes a test of patience at this point, because each individual scale requires its own little shadow, which I'm adding in with little sort of circular motions of the colored pencil. And, you know, depending on how creepy you want it to look, you can really delineate these scales and call more and more attention to them. I'm actually going for something, you know, part of my idea with this is to see what happens when you combine a sort of, you know, conventionally beautiful feminine eye with this conventionally repellent reptile skin. What happens when you bring those two things together? Who is the winner between your two impulses to be a little repulsed by the reptilian skin or to admire the beauty of the female eye? So that's kind of part of why I decided to do this. I thought it would be an interesting experiment in a way. So, but you can see that you need to remain aware of your light source. In my case, the light is coming from the, you know, sort of upper left, or certainly the left side. So each one of these scales, I'm adding the shading primarily. Did I say from the left? The light is coming from the right. Oh, dude, learn your right from your left, man. How did you succeed in this business without knowing that? Light is coming from the right, and so I'm adding the shadows to the left. And so, you know, again, at this point, it just becomes quite a lot of repetition, and so I think it is going to be a matter of kicking it into time-lapse. But I do want to show you one thing quickly. Notice that in the area of the green scales, I'm adding the shading with green, but in the area of the blue scales, as you might imagine, I'm switching to a blue colored pencil. And so when it comes time to add shading to the blue area, I guess I'll sort of switch up here for a second. All of those scales are going to get their shading with the blue colored pencil. And this can be a great way of adding shading to any illustration, not just to you know, a surface that is supposed to be lizard skin, but, you know, instead of just pulling out black or gray for adding shading, a lot of times if your shading is done with a darker version of the same color that's beneath it, that can be more effective as a way of suggesting shadow than to simply apply black to all the different parts of your drawing indiscriminately. So there you go, a little extra coloring tip that can be applied to any number of illustrations. Well, I'm going to go ahead and kick it back into time-lapse. Call in Old Man Time-Lapse, as we will be using him a lot in this in this video. Yeah, I still got it. They need me. Anyway, we're going to bring in Old Man Time-Lapse to add shading to all these various scales, and then we'll come back to work on the next section of the process. All right, well, things are coming along. I wanted to show you, you know, even though I said that I like using green colored pencil for adding the shadows in the green area, that doesn't mean I'll never use black. For the deepest area with the fold of the eyelid, I feel like this could probably use a boost, so I have pulled out my trusty black Prismacolor to add a bit of extra darkness just in this one area. So, you know, contrast, making your darks really dark, and later on, by way of the white gouache, we'll make the whites extra white, and that way, you know, you get the full range of darkness and light within a single illustration. That really helps for making something look fully 3D. So anyway, that's just showing you that I'm not absolutely sticking to the, you know, green for shadows rule or whatever that I put forth earlier. Well, I think it's time to move on to the next stage, which for me is to kind of return to the watercolor to sort of add just I'm often trading back and forth between the two things. I feel like the watercolor stuff is a little washed out in some of these areas, so I'm going to go ahead and pull out the paint brush again to go back into certain areas to maybe just deepen the color a little bit. Okay, well, I'm not completely done with the sort of lizard skin surface here, but I think it's time to finish off the areas relating to the eye itself. Now, as I said, this video is not about how to draw the eye. I've got a number of other videos that cover that. Again, the links are going to be in the info box. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and all in time-lapse just do this area of the illustration that relates to the eye. Alright, well, sorry so much of that was in time-lapse, but as I said, this is only about the skin, the lizard skin texture thing, and I think that I've hopefully taken you through that part of it in a step-by-step way. You can see me now kind of going back in after having completed this area of the eye and the eyelashes and so forth, and beefing up some of these lines. That happens a lot, I find, when I'm working on really a drawing or illustration of any kind. You complete one part of it, it sort of looks like it's done, but then when you complete another part of it, it just causes you to need to go back and rebalance things a little bit, get a little more contrast in there, perhaps. Anyway, we are coming up near the end where I will pull out my trusty white gouache and add some final highlights. I do tend to wait until the very end before adding white gouache highlights. It is white paint, and if you do it earlier in the process, then you may drag your hand across it, and it won't be as purely white. It'll sort of pick up dirt off of your fingers and so forth. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the gouache, and we'll go and do these last final touches. Okay, so I've got my white gouache that should be available at any good art supply store. And I'm going to go in, I'm going to start adding little white highlights here and there. Now, you really have to remember where your light source is. As I said, let's see if I can remember my directions. Coming from the right. And that means that the where you want to add highlights is going to be on the right-hand side of each one of these little scales. Is that what they are? Lizardy scales. But you do have to be careful because you could get carried away and start adding them everywhere throughout the entire illustration, and I think if you do that, then it sort of defeats the power of adding highlights. You want to add them just in a few places where you imagine sunlight would actually glint off of the scales. So, this comes down to your knowledge of light and the way light behaves. Certainly doesn't hurt to look at photo reference, or let's say that you wanted to add the highlights to a dinosaur illustration. If you had even like a toy of that dinosaur and you shine light on it, you're going to see where the highlights tend to, glint off of, say, the forehead of the dinosaur or the tail or whatever. So rather than just winging it, it is probably a good idea to have a good look at something. And happily, because I've done so many of these eye illustrations, I've become a little familiar of where the where the highlights tend to go on certain parts of the eye, and so I'm just sort of translating that into these individual areas where the reptilian scales will be. What is it about the word reptilian? I sound like a bad guy when I say that word, reptilian. It's going to be interesting to hear what people think of this video, because it's quite an unusual image, isn't it? This eye, this very sort of feminine-looking eye with these... It looks like a scientific experiment gone wrong. We wanted to give her the regenerative powers of the lizard, but unfortunately it went horribly wrong. And now she has escaped. Anyway, for some reason this image popped into my mind, and lately I've just been like that with these videos. I'm like, let's do something that's kind of weird, but that I will enjoy doing, and hopefully it's still fairly educational. Well, I think we have gotten to the point where it's time to add highlights to the eye itself, and I'm just going to do that part of it in time-lapse, since I did really want to keep the focus firmly on the lizard skin texture in terms of what's being taught in this video. So let's go ahead. I'm going to kick it into time-lapse to add the highlights to the rest of the illustration, and we'll be back with some final words. All right, well, there's my video on illustrating reptilian skin, or to use the bad guy voice, reptilian skin. The experiment gave her reptilian skin. Astonishing. Let me know what you thought of this video, especially this approach of using a sort of unconventional image to teach a certain technique. I know it's kind of freaky looking, maybe. It'll be interesting to see what people say in the comment section. I'll be looking forward to reading those. But let me go ahead and thank anyone who has supported me by getting any of my books. We got Brody's Ghosts and Miki Falls, my 2 graphic novel series, as well as Mastering Manga 1 and Mastering Manga 2, my How to Draw books. Honestly, guys, it means so much to me when you help me out by getting those books. But let's go ahead and lay down this pencil. I want to thank you all for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be back with another one real soon.